Ciao, my friends! I am so pleased that this wine season of the Foretop was brought to you exclusively by Erath Winery because that meant that I got to sit down and chat with head winemaker Leah Adent. Leah is a fascinating person. She grew up in Alaska and she's made wine all over the world, and it was such fun to pop open a refreshing bottle of Erath Quail Run Pinot Blanc 2019 and chat with her for the interview you'll hear in the middle of this episode. And that Quail Run Pinot Blanc 2019 is one of a special 3-pack of Erath wines you can order too at a 15% discount. That's at erath.com/theforetop. Erath, of course, ERATH. Use the promo code FORETOP to get that 15% discount. You can also purchase additional bottles. This offer is good through December 31st, 2022. So what are you waiting for? And now, let's get this episode started.
Hey, Catherine.
Hey, Martin.
I got a question for you.
Oh, yeah? What's your question?
What do you call it when you invite a hobbit to a diversity meeting?
I have no idea.
You call it Tolkienism.
Hello and welcome to The Foretop. It's a roundtable discussion of today's hot button topics in the wine and food world. I am your host, Catherine Cole.
And I'm your host, Martin Reyes, Master of Wine. And on this episode, we are going to discuss one of those uncomfortable topics that make people squirm. But you know what? Those are the topics that we appreciate and value the most at The Foretop. So let's get uncomfortable, shall we?
Yeah, let's get uncomfortable. And this episode is going to examine whether wine culture is inherently white supremacist. And hold on, listeners, I know you heard that phrase and you're thinking, white supremacist, that's not me. That's people in pointed hoods. It's not my problem, right? I think that's what people think when they hear that phrase. But I would ask you, listeners, to just slow down for a second and listen, because I think we're going to learn that white supremacy can be subtle and insidious. It's kind of everywhere. And I think a lot of us perpetuate it every day without realizing what we're doing. But I think that this will be a really wonderful experience to learn about it. And I don't believe that we will feel scolded at the end, but just really enlightened.
Definitely, Catherine. And, I've certainly experienced versions of this. I mean, a lot of what drove me to go for, credentials and certifications until I couldn't go any further was in part the feeling that this was it was a white man's party. And sometimes I wasn't invited. But I think thankfully now with the solvent of education that tends to dissolve some of the crusts of stereotypes and racial structures, I feel a little bit better about it, but there's still so much more we can do. The industry has a long way to go.
Absolutely. We just need to do a lot of listening. People who love wine get excited when we talk about diversity in wine. And so I feel like we can take that excitement and talk about promoting diversity in the wine industry and celebrating it. So I'm hoping that we can talk a bit about that today.
Well, we have two truly accomplished guests who are going to help us learn. We're going to learn together. And Tahira Habibi first. She joins us from Atlanta. She's a celebrated sommelier, may I say, a founder and CEO who is the powerhouse behind the Hue Society and the Wine Plus Culture Fest. She was the first Black woman to grace the cover of Wine Enthusiast's prestigious 40 Under 40, which is now known as the Future 40. And she's on the board of the even more prestigious James Beard Awards.
And right here in Oregon's Willamette Valley, we have the one and only Tiket Bramlett, president of Compris Vineyard, founder of Our Legacy Harvested, board member at the International Pinot Noir Celebration. She's also a wine enthusiast, 40 Under 40. And I just read that both Tiket and Tahira are nominees for the Wine Enthusiast Wine Star Award for Social Visionary of the Year 2022. So, wow, we've got two amazing guests with us today, and I can't wait to hear from them.
Congratulations to both of you. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks for having us.
It's funny. I think we all can agree, and even people who are listening who are not in the industry. Number one, the wine industry can just be really exclusive, right? I mean, who can afford to drink Sine Qua Non, DRC, Cristal, other than the overly wealthy, right? And sometimes we get crumbs if we're invited to a tasting. And then on the other hand, there's this perception that we're also just a bunch of progressive, hippie, organic farmers, right? So I think when we start talking about uncomfortable issues like, white supremacy and wine culture, everyone points at really expensive high-end wines and says, that's the problem. And then they absolve themselves of responsibility because, hey, they're running eco-friendly businesses, organic, biodynamic. So that must mean that they're nice people, right? Well, I mean, as a person of color, I can attest that there's a lot of subtle prejudice and bias that presents barriers for folks like me and our guests. So, Tahira, I'd like to start with you because when you spoke out about your experiences in studying for the Court of Master Sommelier's entrance exam, it was a watershed moment. I remember the moment vividly. Could you tell us more about that?
Long story short, I'm not going to go into the whole situation, but, with the Court of Masters, it's incredibly expensive to study wine and to become good at it and all of that stuff. And part of the thing back in 2011 was that the Court of Masters had this hold on the industry, and anybody who wanted to be anything had to go through this particular system. Otherwise, people would literally say, like, you're not a SOM, or you're not, if you weren't certified through that particular organization. And so I paid for myself to fly to New York. I paid for myself, my hotel. It's a 2-day test, their first test. And basically, their whole thing was you have to call them master if you wanted to speak. If you wanted to raise your hand and ask a question, they wanted you to call them master. And, it wasn't a situation where it was unusual to be the only Black person in the space. And I just knew they weren't talking to me because there was no way. And I'd been studying for this for months, right? I had already had certifications from the Wine School of Philadelphia, which is an excellent school, but you get so indoctrinated, you don't even, you're not looking at anything else. It's like tunnel vision. And so I raised my hand because I had a question about something. And, they basically told me I needed to, you put my hand down. So I called the master, and I just like, yeah. So that was a whole thing because at the time, and, still to this day, there are no Black women who were master SOMs. And that was like a goal of mine. And I was like hell bent on it. And it all fizzled and died in that one moment. So, all of that work, all that studying, or whatever, not for nothing. I was very educated, but at the same time, the goals, I had singular goals, and all of those goals had to immediately be revised because there was no way that I was going to continue through that system. And to make it worse, I went for years in complete fear. Like, I was terrified somebody was going to find out that I didn't have those certifications. No matter how good I got at my job, that was always something that was looming. It was terrifying. Like, until I really got out on my own and created my own path, I was very, very nervous about somebody finding that out. And the craziest part is I wasn't concerned about them finding out what was said to me. I was more concerned about them finding out that I didn't have the certification. And that is wild.
This is one of those things where in the moment, I'm sure people didn't think much of it, but in retrospect, now that that is no longer required of students to use that term, it is shocking to think about. I mean, I guess this is the way history works and why making change is so important, but thank you for bringing that change about.
I would say this in general about all organizations. CMS was not solo in the way that they operate, right? That word is what triggered me. But there have been multiple times, and when I made that video, I got everybody's sob story. Like, I really was grieving, and then I was grieving with a lot of people. And like I said, I'll say this about any organization: it's not changing the board. Like, it does nothing unless you're changing a board and you're like really creating some real diversity. You're still bringing people into harmful systems. So you can change the board. If you're not changing the system, it doesn't matter. But yeah, the board changed out. What in the system changed? The language is still the same, right? And I'm not talking about the word master. I'm talking about the language is Eurocentric. So, that's another system. Anytime you have a group of people who completely have to change their identity in order to learn or to be a part of something, it's harmful. And this is not a conversation that I haven't had with them. I've had multiple conversations with them about the things that they would need to change. Have I seen them? Not necessarily. Some stuff, great. The board changed, great.
There are so many small ways in which wine is exclusionary, and people who've been in the industry for a long time don't realize it. And I totally agree with you about certifications. The certifications are not only racist, but also classist, because a lot of folks can't afford to do all that traveling and, purchase all that wine they need to taste.
No, so what Tahira was saying and was spot on for me in terms of the accessibility for education right now. That has been a big thing for our Legacy Harvested, and what we've been focusing on is working on providing accessibility and starting to have those conversations, because I think that that's one of the biggest challenges in all of this is how do we continue to evolve as an industry and have these conversations when it comes to certification. What does it look like? How accessible is it? And what language are we using when we are in these courses? I think it's a key factor that we're looking into.
We have a lot of fear of being wrong, even when we tell each other and tell our community and tell our wine consumers it's okay to be wrong. But really, that Eurocentric way of thinking, the cluster of flavors and fruits and foods, the food pairing, it's hard to go against that tide. And I think a lot of that is what we talk about when we consider whether there's a white supremacist culture in wine.
I think, white supremacy teaches you to hoard power. It teaches you to hoard resources, all of those things. And so when you think about the wine industry and how an agricultural product, which wine is an agricultural product and they get skipped over, has become this luxury product this way, you create this space where you make sure that people don't feel like they belong in it. And you do that through language. You do that through hoarding resources so that people cannot get, and even if they're willing to adjust to the language, now they can't get the product. And even if they can get the product, now, this is unattainable. You have to look a certain way. For people of color, you consistently are chipping away at pieces of yourself to fit into this space just so that you can have a job and make a living and do what you love. And there's a level of inhumane tendency in that is just insane. And when we talk about like things like the Hue Society and why it exists is so that you can reach people's basic humanity and allow them to be themselves, which is a human right. It should be, but in this industry, it's not. So it's full of white supremacist ideals. It's based off of it.
Absolutely. One thing that stands out to me as Tahira was speaking was the notion of perfectionism, that there's only one right way, there's only one correct answer. And I feel like the wine industry is full of that. And when one is just starting out, it's terrifying. And what if that one right answer relates to white culture? I think, we were talking earlier about the way we talk about wine and the food pairings we mentioned and the aromatic descriptors all come from white culture.
Yeah, I think we are definitely finding different ways to open that conversation up more by stepping into these spaces and being unafraid to say and have the uncomfortable dialogue, right? To be in this space here and to be able to go into these wineries and be able to go to these other organizations and say, we need to have an honest conversation about what's happening because you are stripping away at the essence of who this person is, culturally, who they are. That was one of the biggest takeaways for me when I was taking my certification courses, because people were using descriptors that I had never heard before. So when I'm asking for a definition to this point, that was when my instructor realized that there was pivoting that needed to happen in that moment and that he was not doing justice to his entire classroom. So that was where the conversation changed, because I'd never heard of something like bramble before, right? So it was like, who tastes bramble? Who smells it? What is that? Like, where does this come from? And it was all of these different descriptors that people were giving that were so foreign to me. And all of a sudden he said, okay, we have not been doing a good job of this. I recognize the fact that everybody in this space is white except for you. There's pivoting that needs to happen, and I have not been doing you justice either. Because as a fellow person of color, I realize that I have not been supporting you in this space, and we've been looking at things the wrong way. So it's just like having these little conversations and having that recognition is always part of the thing that gets that ball rolling and changing the culture.
Yeah, I think language is important. Obviously, it's important everything, but language is the one thing that connects cultures. That's how you identify with different cultures. And so when you are saying that, bramble or all these other things, not even just talking about Black American culture, right? A lot of Caribbean cultures grow up with different kinds of fruits. And then you bring in Asian culture and none of these things are mentioned. And then you want someone to go in an exam and be able to call these things out.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
That's the thing that kills me, is like, for somebody to get their certification, to be able to level up in their job, because that's a requirement now. Like, it's not for you to even get into the door, depending on what your name is, right? To Ket, you definitely got to have some certifications behind that name, right?
I just had this conversation recently about what people deem exotic fruits.
Oh,
I think that is something that always needs to be acknowledged, because I always follow up with, well, what is exotic?
right.
This is where the words matter.
What were some of the fruits, or what was the conversation like?
I mean, it was amongst people of color. So we were having this conversation of, what do people deem in tasting notes of what is an exotic fruit, and why is it labeled an exotic fruit? And having the opportunity to really dive into that, because it happens so often at a tasting room space where someone will say, oh, that fruit tastes exotic to me. Well, what is it? Like, what is it about it that's exotic? I need to know, so we can zero in on this, because what's exotic to you will not be to somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
So where does that person come from? It's trying to change these terms and these definitions and just acknowledge what the fruit is.
Yeah. And we still see those tasting notes that say, pair this Riesling with Asian cuisine. It's like,
Yes.
That's half the world. So,
Right.
Okay.
I grew up around guava, guava paste and membrillo, which is quince paste. And, I think that in some cases those are considered exotic. And yet for me, they're like, I'm home.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the word exotic itself, it's problematic, right? It feeds into the idea of white supremacist culture, in the sense that it's outside the norm. It's foreign. It isn't. You may not know about it, and if you don't, then it's put into a bucket with all the other not normal fruits or flavors that this wine culture deems exotic, and that consistently that feeds upon the problematic aspect of what we're talking about.
That's the thing. It's they, right? Like, they are the deciding factors of all things. If it doesn't make sense to them, then it's something else. It gets othered. And the truth is, like, there's a global majority way bigger than the white collective. And the fact that anytime they don't understand something, it gets othered is the key here. It's through and through with not just wine, but it's the premise of white supremacy. They are the decision makers. They are the people who decide what is normal and what is not, what is acceptable, what is not. And when you do catch up to these bars, they move the goalpost to fit white supremacist ideals. So I just thought that was really a really interesting point. Like, I didn't grow up around guava either, but I would never say that guava was an exotic fruit.
Yeah, I love this conversation, because it really is about just looking at our language, thinking about just the subtle ways in which we can kind of change our perspective. And I also wanted to point out, maybe we'll post it, that Esther Mobley, friend of the pod, had an interesting article about the language of wine in the San Francisco Chronicle. Hey everyone, I am back with the second installment of our interview series with Leah Adent, head winemaker at Erath in Oregon's Willamette Valley. I am just tickled because Erath is sponsoring this season of the Foretop because, this means I get to sit down with Leah and just chat about wine. So, Leah, I'm curious to hear about some of the traditions that have been established in your historic winery when you got to Erath, and are you looking to change things up a little bit in the winemaking style?
Yes and yes. Yes and no. Dick's vision for Erath was, I think, he loved Pinot Noir, right? That's why he forged his own path up to the Willamette Valley. And it wasn't just to make great Pinot Noir, but make it available and accepting for everyone. Not everyone has expendable income to spend on the wonderful Burgundy wines that we all love. So I think making a great value Pinot Noir has always been at the ethos of Erath, and at the same time, exceptional fruit quality. The vineyards that I get to work with now are stunning and small and done the right way. And so to put that all together and continue what's already been started, I definitely have a mindset to keep the tradition of Oregon Pinot Noir. I think there's some trend to try and be more like California Pinot Noir or try to be like Burgundy Pinot Noir. And Erath has always focused on showcasing what Oregon does because it does it so well. So I want to respect that. And at the same time, I have styles and techniques that I've learned from other places that I have the opportunity to play around with. And so we'll start slow. I don't want to alienate anybody, but, we might have some fun at the same time.
Yeah, so speaking of other places where you've made wine, I know you worked a stage at Domaine de l'Arlot in the Côte de Nuit.
Mm-hmm.
So anyone who's into Willamette Valley Pinot Noir is constantly referencing Burgundy.
Yes.
So I wonder if you could kind of compare and contrast your experience in Burgundy and how the winemaking might be as different or similar at
Burgundy
Erath.
was so amazing. It really was exactly what I thought it would be, of old world, opening up the hatch in the floor to take barrels down to the cave and building the fire to steam your barrels and, native everything, very few additions, if any. And I got to tour other domains, not just Domaine de l'Arlot, which was really cool to see other Burgundian ways of winemaking to get a kind of a better experience. And, everything was fairly simple. I think they have that mentality of let's not do too much. Let's not overmake these wines. Let's let them speak for themselves. So the differences I saw in those cellars was we do pump overs or we do punch downs or we do a mix of the two. We use this much new percent oak or slightly less new percent oak, but it was fairly consistent across the board in the cellars of how to make Burgundian wine. And I think it speaks for itself. And I think that's a little bit easier to do when you have such a history that Burgundy has, but also you take fruit from such a small place. At Domaine de l'Arlot, we took fruit from the greater Nuit Saint-Georges area, and we maybe only traveled 5 kilometers in either direction. In the Willamette Valley, it's a little bit different. We're taking fruit from an hour north to an hour south of where we are in Dundee, and the soil changes, the Van Duzer changes. Mm-hmm. So I think we need to adapt to that and make the best wine from each location because they are more different.
Mm-hmm. For sure. Well, with that, I think it's time to have another sip of this Pinot Blanc.
All right.
As we start off our conversation, and of course, Pinot Blanc is one of the accepted historic grapes in Burgundy as well as Champagne. Did you ever taste any when you were there?
I don't think that I did. I got into Aligote when I was over there, honestly, because it was a little bit cheaper, and that was really good for me at the time. It's funny about Pinot Blanc in the Willamette Valley. Every winemaker I talk to wishes there was more planted because we all love it because it's delicate, but it's brimming with acidity and fresh fruit, and you can barrel age it or you can do stainless, and it grows well. But I don't think the consumer is quite as on board as we are. So yeah. It's a winemaker favorite in the valley for sure.
Well, this one is delicious. The moment I took this second taste, I got just fresh mandarin orange just immediately, and it's just so refreshing. Such a great aperitif, but it's got the body to go through the whole meal. So.
Right.
Well, listeners, I'm sure at this point you are salivating for this Pinot Blanc, so you will be glad to know that Erath is offering a special 3-pack at erath.com/theforetop. Enter the promo code FORTOP to receive a 15% discount through December 31st, 2022. That is good for bottle purchases as well as this special 3-pack, and that includes this wonderful Pinot Blanc we are tasting, the Quail Run Pinot Blanc 2019, as well as the Resplendent Pinot Noir 2019 and the Single Vineyard Knight's Gambit Pinot Noir, also from 2019. All right, well, we will hear more from Leah in upcoming episodes, and I cannot wait to continue this conversation, but for now, back to the show. Now, let's shift our conversation to focus on how we can make positive change. Oregon is one of the whiter states in the US, and it was actually big, exciting news when you were hired as the first Black female winery CEO, Tiquette. That winery, I wanted to ask you about that because that winery was previously called Vidon Vineyard, but it has relaunched recently with really beautiful packaging and branding, I have to say. And and I bet you're responsible for that. And it has a new name, Compris Vineyard. And, we've been talking about language, so I thought maybe you could tell us about that name change and the reasoning behind it.
Yes. So when I took on the position for Compris, formerly Vidon, one of the big things for our owners was to acknowledge stolen land and to help our community and just help build and have an equitable, safe space for people to come and enjoy wine and quite literally meet people where they're at and take them on a journey and tell them the story of not just our vineyard, but of Willamette Valley and the wine industry as a whole. So knowing that that was their goal, at first I was like, okay, this might be a little bit of a tall order to put in a label, but we're going to see how we're going to put it all together. And we were very fortunate to partner with a team that really helped us be intentional and thoughtful when it came down to the artwork and even coming up with the name. There were many questions that they were asking of us of, what our ultimate goals were, what we wanted the definition of our space to be. And when we started looking up names, it was actually our winemaker who came up with the name Compris, because when you look at the definition of it, the meaning is to be united and understood. And that was exactly the core of what Drew and Aaron wanted in that space. They wanted people to be able to come together and to feel heard and understood in that space. So once we started coming up with everything and coming up with our mission statement, everything just really fell into place. And it was a beautiful moment for all of us this past spring where we were able to release the first label, and it was a Tempranillo Rosé. So it was something unique on top of it being in our space and watching our community really come together and enjoy that. So it's been really special for us.
I love this so much. I just love that story. And I do think, those of us in the wine industry, we need to think about Oregon history. Oregon's history is horrifying. This was a state that started out as an exclusionary state. People wanted it to be all white. There was even a lash law. I just can't even talk about it because it makes me just, there's no way to undo all the harm, but I love hearing about positive change like this. Thank you, Tiquette, for doing this.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I think for us, it was just always important to acknowledge the past, acknowledge the history, the problematic situations that have happened in this state, right? This was known historically as the white flight state. Mm-hmm. And I think that it's important to acknowledge that in order to keep moving forward. And that's part of the evolution of this space, and having these conversations even with other wineries has been great. I call myself sandpaper when it comes to these moments because I'm okay with a little bit of friction, because that's how you find sometimes the diamonds, and that's how you find the beautiful stones. I am okay with having the honest conversation of saying, let's put the ego aside and acknowledge what's really happening here.
There's also something to be said about being in leadership and what those sacrifices look like. Because you are sandpaper, people don't want to, rub up against you, but that goes both ways. right?
Yes.
Does that
Yes.
not go? That goes both ways, because
Truly.
you you have to sacrifice so many things doing this work. Like when you stand
Yes.
up for the right thing, you do this work. We make a lot of sacrifices. We have to walk away from a lot of money
Yes.
because there's alignments that are just not being made.
Mhm.
People don't want to, like I said, rub up against you, so they keep their distance. You don't get as many opportunities. You have to kind of forge those things, and it's great because a lot of times do you know that they're genuine because people know who you
Right.
are and what to expect.
Right.
But at the same time, there's a ton of sacrifice that comes with this work, and I just don't think that it's acknowledged. It kind of just looks like, oh, you're a hero. Oh, you're doing this and that. And the other. It's like, no,
Yes.
it's
Mhm.
lonely in the sand. Like smoothing wood is lonely. Let's just say, oh
Right.
God,
Yes.
you get what I'm saying.
Yes.
So you look. If you
Yes.
look behind you now, you hear a shh, 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 shh. Oh, it's Tiket. He's just showing. Tiket, you have started something called Our Legacy Harvested. Tahira, you founded something called the Hugh Society. Can both of you tell us a little bit about both of those organizations?
I started Our Legacy Harvested because it had been something that I had been thinking about for a while. My family has always been community organizers in one facet or another. So it was always something that was important for me and of value, especially in the space out here in the Willamette Valley. One of my biggest issues when I had moved up here was the fact that it was hard to connect and find community that I could go to that would support me and understood what my journey was here. And once I was able to find that for myself, the next step became, okay, now there are other people reaching out to me saying, how did you do this? How did you move to this state that is seen as problematic? And we are in these spaces. Are you safe there? All of these questions were being asked to me. So I said, well, now that I know I'm not the only one that has felt this, what are the things that I can do to provide for others in this space? And that was where Our Legacy Harvested Cup came from. And the whole mission was to partner with wineries and be intentional about our partnership and make requirements saying that they have to do a specific DE&I training that with a company that we are partnered with. And from there, they are eligible for interns where we provide their education, housing, and transportation for them. And these wineries bring them on, hire them on, and teach them from vine to wine. And outside of that space, we take them around to different educational experiences so we can show them every facet of the industry. And we really couldn't do it without the support and promotion from organizations like the Hughes Society.
Wow, that's a lot of work.
Yeah.
It is a lot of work. Tahira, look, I follow the Hugh Society on everything I can on social media, and I love what you're doing. You know that we've talked about it in the past. Tell us about it.
Yes. The Hughes Society was really born out of my desire to dismantle this idea that you have to assimilate, you have to crush parts of yourself in order to be in this industry. And so I started my career at the St. Regis. It was a very high level job, but I also went through a lot of trauma. When I decided to become an entrepreneur in 2015, I knew how to reach my culture. In particular, I know I didn't see a lot of people that looked like me interested in wine. I saw what they were trying to sell to us, and the fact that they really weren't selling anything outside of Moscato. And I said, okay, what does this look like? Like, how do you get more people in wine? It's particularly Black people. And I knew that it had to be through our lens. It had to be through our cultural perspective. And this is what was going to make people, make us be like, oh, okay, I see myself in that, because we just never saw ourselves. So my first organization was called Sipping Socials, and it was just events. I just wanted to see. So I started throwing events through the Black lens. And I meant, like, I was bringing in these wines. But, I did a wine and reggae festival, and I was like, okay, let's see if this works. And it worked. a little too well. 3,000 people showed up. I only had space for 1,000. That's a whole other podcast. But
That's
so great.
amazing, by the way.
I love that.
Amazing.
But it was proof that it could work, right? We had our food there. It was 100% our cultural perspectives. And I was like, okay, now I can expand this. So where do you do? I need to move to the blackest city that I know, Atlanta. And I want to take this across the country. But I knew I wasn't going to be able to scale with that name. So I changed the name. Said, all right, I want to make a whole society. Like, I know this works. I want to get all of these people in different cities and, just like thinking abstractly. I wasn't even sure if it was going to work, if I'm being honest. But I was like, I'm going to try it. We're going to see how this goes. And then, I just stay 100% authentic and true to who I am, what my culture is. And, because people have never seen a Black-centered organization, obviously I got called all kinds of names. Oh, you're racist. Oh, you're this. Black people don't like wine. You're not going to blah, blah, blah. The name Hue Society is a double entendre. It came from a Jay-Z lyric. I'm sure if you Google me, that's one of the first articles that comes up. Everybody loves this. but I'm a big Jay-Z fan, and he was saying, what's better than one billionaire too, especially if the same hue as you. And I said, you know what? That's exactly what it is. It's hue, because it's the hues of the wines, it's the hues of the people. And it was never intended to be exclusive, right? It was just intended to be centered. And we all know when Black people lead, a community follows. And that's proven itself to be true over and over and over again. We are naturally community oriented people. And so now we have chapters across the country. We provide access and resources to everybody. And it's not just Black people. There's all kinds of people. We have everything from master somms to doctors and lawyers. It's not, wine is just another part of the community. The basis of the Hue Society is community. It's about feeling good, feeling loved and seen and heard 100% as you are, being able to learn, being able to understand the language that other people are saying without the shame or the guilt. And it's just a collective of people who, have different levels of wine knowledge, and you're consistently leveling up. And I just think it's beautiful the way that it's been spreading, and people have embraced it, and I'm super excited about that. And again, it's not just Black people. Like, so if you see nothing else, it's just proof that it works when you do things from a holistic communal perspective, instead of trying to gatekeep or hoard or operate from a supremacist system. I mean, I'm really proud of this work. I've been doing it for a long time. When I started amplifying Black brands, no one would touch them. No one would touch them. Now you have influencers, they're mentioning and all the magazines and all that stuff. And I think 2020 helped with that a lot. But I was doing this long before then. And it's just, I think it's great to see now. You still see who's around, who's doing the work, who's absolutely making sure that there's equity and equality, because those are not the same things, although people use them interchangeably. And who is fighting for that at all times. And like I said earlier, there are lots of sacrifices that come with that. There are people who won't associate with you, who won't help you, who are not trying to. There are also Black people who enjoy being the only Negro in the room.
Right.
So when we talk about white supremacy, it's internalized. It's not just for white people. It affects everybody, and you internalize that kind of oppression, and you manifest it in a lot of different ways. And one of those things is, what is my proximity to these organizations? And, I want to be the only one in there. I'm going to go in there and I'm going to slam this door behind me, because I'm not going to sacrifice this opportunity that I got or risk it for somebody else. Like, absolutely not. So the Hue Society is the complete opposite of that.
Thanks to both of you for nudging the needle ever so slightly forward in the right direction.
Absolutely.
Hats off to both of you. And I have lots of hats, so thank you. Hats off.
This is true. This is very true. Well, I am sorry to say we are at the end of our time, but we do have our dessert wine course. Tahira, did you bring a dessert wine?
You know what? Beyonce's Renaissance is is
Yes.
literally like the fact that she cusses so much in this album just brings me so much joy.
Right?
Oh man.
Yes.
And the freedom that she has just opened up for so many people. Like but no, it's a masterpiece. Honestly, it's insane. And it makes me happy every day. I'm not even like, that's my dessert.
I love it.
You know, you're allowed to cuss on this podcast, so tell us how you really feel with a swear word.
Oh, it's a fucking masterpiece. You guys know how much I cuss. I have not cussed this entire podcast, and
I was wondering, yeah.
I'm feeling like myself, but
Oh,
this
welcome
is strange.
home now. Yes, it's fucking awesome. Tiket, what about you?
I had two that I brought. So one was
Ooh.
Renaissance because it was, as Tahira said so perfectly, fucking brilliant. And then the other one that I really enjoy just to decompress and like get a good laugh is the podcast Smartless. It's one that I will listen to while I am cooking, and just listening to those three fools talk about whatever to a surprise guest has been really entertaining for me and just given me a good laugh at the end of the day while I'm cooking dinner. So,
And remind us who the hosts are of that Smartless podcast.
so Smartless is with Jason Bateman, Sean Hayes, and Will Arnett.
Gotta check that out. Thank you.
Love a good podcast recommendation.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, on that note, maybe I'll share mine, and then Martine, you can share yours. For my dessert, I just wanted to say, first of all, it's so inspiring, all the work that our guests have been doing, and all of us, no matter who we are, should be doing our own work. And I think that there are many things that hold people back. They think they need to read a thick book or do a bunch of training to become better people, and then they're just kind of paralyzed by fear and defensiveness and denial, and they just think, well, I'm not a racist, so I can get on with my life. And I just wanted to encourage folks, if you are listening to this podcast, you understand how great podcasts are. So I just wanted to encourage folks to just get into your favorite podcast app and just search for the term anti-racist. I would not search for the term white supremacist, even though we used it a bit in this episode because it brings up a lot of really nasty stuff. But, if you want to learn about some actionable things that you can do, find a podcast where you really just enjoy the person who's speaking and learn a little bit about how you can be anti-racist. I'm certainly trying to learn every day, and I love podcasts. So I like to learn that way. And I just wanted to encourage guests to do that as well. Martine, how about you?
Yeah, thanks, Catherine. It's really important what you said, and I'm glad that your dessert has a little bit of a sweet and sour element to it. Sometimes those are the best desserts. Mine is, well, you got. I don't know if I've said this one before or not, but Magic Spoon. It's a high protein, keto friendly, gluten free, grain free, soy free, wheat free, totally delicious, childlike cereal that grown-ups could eat, but also you can feed your kids. We both know I've got an 8-year-old and a 4-year-old. I am in deep, deep, deep dad universe. Even my body is a full-on dad bod these days. And I'll tell you, if you find something like Magic Spoon that gives the kids what they want, but it actually is secretly healthy, it's like a godsend. It makes mornings so much easier.
Oh, I'm Googling now.
I just Googled it, and it looks colorful and fun and amazing. Yeah. I think my cereal eating kids would love it. I'm going to have to send this to them.
Yeah.
It is genuinely one of my favorites.
Is it? Oh, you like it? Cool.
I love Magic Spoon.
Awesome. If I grew up eating this stuff, I probably would actually finally be 6 foot and actually semi-muscular as opposed to what I am now. So,
Wait, I have a discount code?
I think we all deserve one. I think we do. And hey, look at those tasting descriptors. They're fruity, peanut butter, cocoa, cinnamon. I think these are all pretty straightforward. Maple. Yeah.
Maple waffle. Yeah. There's no quince paste or guava flavored Magic Spoon yet.
No kumquats.
No kumquats.
Can I tell y'all though? I know we're about to go, but I used to use it as an insult. I used to call people kumquat all the time, and they thought I was cussing at them.
Oh.
And I was like, "This is why language is important."
It does sound kind of dirty, doesn't it?
It does. I love it.
It does.
So it's my favorite fruit. It's my favorite fruit to insult somebody with. Like,
I love a good kumquat in the morning.
Martine, I think we need to wrap it up though with our outro.
Do. Yes, we do.
Sadly, because we got to get on with our evening. So thank you to our wonderful guests. Tahira Habibi is on Instagram as the Sipping Socialite. You can also find her at thehughsociety.com.
Yes, and you can find Tiket Bramlett at ourlegacyharvested.com. And the winery she was talking about, can't wait to try a bottle of this, Compris Vineyard, Compris, as in Sam, vineyard.com. And you can find me, Martin Reyes, at reyeswinegroup.com and napathrives.org, name change, coming up soon. And my distributor business here in California, winewise.biz.
Busy at winewise.biz. And you can find me, Catherine Cole, at catherinecole.com. But don't go there. Go to theforetop.org, where you can find our social media handles. Please get in touch with us. Let us know what you thought of this episode. Did you learn something? Because I definitely did. Signing out from the high-fiber protein pack city of Portland, Oregon.
And signing out from the keto-friendly, soy-free city of Napa Valley. Thanks so much for listening. Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.
This has been the Four Top Podcast. Catherine Cole is our executive producer. Izzy Kramer is our senior producer. And I'm Keelan King, sound supervisor. We are also assisted by audio editor Michelle Richards, editorial assistant Nick Toole, and media assistant Ruby Welkovich. Please visit our website, theforetop.org, to learn more about us, listen to back episodes, reach out to us on social media, and purchase books written by our amazing panelists. And if you have not already subscribed to The Foretop on iTunes or Spotify, please do so and leave us a rating. Stay safe out there, and thanks for listening.